I personally know someone who got their USAID funding cut, and here is my admonition to any of us who believe about how we can fill the gaps. Here we go. TLDR, I was a missionary in Zambia and India. I visited Zambia 4 times and tried to help those affected with HIV in that country to build businesses of their own so that they could not rely so heavily upon foreign aid in order to advance their families and their needs. And just a little short aside, the people in Zambia who might be afflicted with HIV typically get run out of most of the social conventions that they need so desperately there to try to rely upon in order to like feed themselves, have their water and their other needs met. And I was in places where they didn't have running water, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have windows, glass on their windows, but they did have joy. They received us with just an incredible amount of hospitality. They were really beautiful people, a beautiful culture, but one that has most obviously been affected by corruption, not only of the government that they're currently under, but also the Chinese who built a lot of the infrastructure there and also allowed a lot of the infrastructure to fall apart, within a few short years after it was built in the first place. So, having been a missionary there, we started off in a general support missionary work, meaning we would go there, meet with the pastors, encourage them, and sort of be apostolic about our approach. But we found out really quickly that when we bought or brought things with us to try to bless the people of that country, it ended up, in fact, being such a difficult exchange because they would often fight over any of the materials that we brought. Any money that was available would be all but begged for. And while we were sympathetic to the plight of the people that we were engaging with, we also recognized our limitations and the fact that after we left the country, we would ultimately not be able to provide any support. So we began to surmise that we needed a different way to interact with them so that we could improve their access to their own dignity, their own ability to make products or make services or businesses of their own. And one way that needed to happen was that we would teach them an internal banking structure where they would lend money to each other instead of going to a bank because it was corrupt and they didn't have money to give and they wouldn't have lent money to the people that we were interacting with anyway. So after having been there a few times and building some of those micro business structures, really helping them build them, they took it and ran with it, and they did much better than I would have been able to tell them or teach them how to do. We made the calculation that they didn't need us to come over there anymore because they were essentially providing, the financial structures for their own needs. So my friend, one of the dearest men I know named Victor, reached out to us last week or a couple weeks ago and said that with the USAID funding cuts, that the folks with HIV in country would no longer get the benefit of some of the funding that was coming over there. And I have honestly no clue what exactly they were providing, the US government was providing. But I do know that those are some people who are actually in a serious need. And so, my heart goes out to them and I continue to pray for them. I would love to go back in country and to try to provide that exposure for my children, as well as increasing the support that I might be able to get for them. But here is the TLDR on all that is Christian charity does not come through the government. And what I had someone jump in the comment section when I was sort of celebrating USAID being cut and said that it is in fact unchristian for me to want them to cut any of the funding to all the various things they were doing throughout the world. And I said, all those things that USAID has been caught doing is very much inherently unchristian. And secondly, the government is an inherently anti-Christian, at this point, anti-Christian monopoly that ultimately does not have the Christian charity in mind when they're doing what they're doing across the world. So here's the calling and the challenge that I'm issuing to myself, my family, as well as our church, and ultimately the Christian church at large, is that we have let our Christian charity be siphoned through taxes into the government and then disseminated throughout the world. And we counted on them sort of to do the reclamation projects in countries that really needed, systems of support. We've allowed the government to usurp that role. And even in our own country, the charity that was necessary, because really, when someone gets benefits from the government, entitlement benefits, that is a much less dignified exchange than could be done by the church if we simply lifted our hands up into those lives of those individuals so that we could provide them the plethora of talent, experience, and opportunities that come within the church. And I know that very specifically because I've been the benefit of that plethora. When I was coming out of addiction myself, there were so many ways that I was mentored into knowing that the church, the way of life that was possible within the church, and by planting more fruitful and good seeds, was going to benefit me in ways that charity could have never done. And so ultimately, the calling is, if USAID in fact does cut things that I would support, which I'm sure there probably are some things they do that I would support, like my friends in Zambia who might actually need that benefit. If they are going to cut those things, it is the church's opportunity to run into the gaps, to see the needs that are inherent, to use our talents to try to engage with those populations in ways that would restore their dignity or maybe give it to them for the first time, and to be able to provide in ways that would ultimately shine the light of Christ into the lives of those that need it most. And so this is an opportunity. All deprivation, all shortcomings, all of those injustices, if you want to even call it that, I wouldn't necessarily, but if you would, all injustice is an opportunity for the church to show the love of Christ in the lives of those who need it most. And so I'm preaching to myself in as much as I'm preaching to everyone else. But this is the one time I've heard of USAID cutting something that might actually resemble Christian charity, except it comes wrapped in a package from the US government, which is inherently unchristian.